And I'll never forget this because, of course, it is time to go to David Tereshchuk. It's time for the Media Beat. Of course, David joins us every Friday at this time. We rebroadcast it over the weekends and also right after our noontime news during the week. I think it's on Tuesday or Wednesday. Anyway, David also has his own website, themediabeat.us. You'll also find him as a PBS television correspondent reporting on ethics and belief. And we say good day to him right now. David, nice to speak to you.
Good day to you from the media capital of the world, New York City. How are you?
I'm fine. And when I was thinking back in my memories about my interview, we all do interviews in our lives that with politicians, with sports stars, with individuals.
You were thinking of your interview with the now late Jim Fowler.
Yeah, and that turned out to be an interview that was just it's one of those interviews that was arranged at the last moment, and we did it, and it's just one of those interviews that clicked. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. They sometimes happen.
Yeah, he was unbelievable, and like I said, a crowd of about 200 people gathered around us, and gave a standing ovation. I know it wasn't for me because
oh, it could have been for you a little bit.
No. He was. It's. I think that's one of the things that makes us so lucky. Yeah, we have to cover the good, the bad, the ugly, but every once in a while, every here and there, you get those special moments that you always hold close to you.
Indeed.
Well,
you make me a little envious. I was just when you were talking about that notable interview, I did a very quick scan of my memory, and do I recall any interview that has stuck with me over I guess about 40 plus years in my case in the business, and I confess there's not a single. Maybe if I put my mind to it in the quiet of some contemplation, I'll come up with one. But at the moment, it's all just a morass of one interview after another.
Well, it develops into that. But I guess what brings it to light is when you read about when somebody like that passes away, and all of a sudden, the drawer opens in your file banks in your mind, and boom, out comes popping something that was just a great time, that you remember instantly like it was yesterday. So
yeah, well, I have one memory like that, but it's nothing so uplifting, I don't think. Not in my memory, although it was a notable occasion. I managed to get in fact, rather short interview with Nelson Mandela. And my memory of it came back, as you say, when his death was reported. It's the one and only time I interviewed him, and it was a short interview. I kind of ambushed him really in a hotel kitchen. In fact, he was being hustled through the kitchen to avoid the press, and I thought that he might be taking that route, so I lay in wait for him. It was the day before the election that installed him as president, the first ever black president of South Africa, the first ever democratically elected president, and I have to confess that I was a little slack-jawed. I was the one and only time in my career, I think I was just simply starstruck, and I didn't do a particularly good interview. I was just in awe of this giant in front of me, and I remember at the end. You remember when he was installed, he got something like 94% of the electorate voting for him in that election. Well, the evening before, in this hotel kitchen, I said, "Good luck for tomorrow, sir." Not one of my proudest moments.
Well, I got a feeling that if I was standing in a kitchen, even if I was waiting for him, and it came true, and Nelson Mandela and I were face to face, I might very well just have frozen.
Well, that's pretty much what I did, I'm afraid.
But those are great memories, though. I mean, when you start thinking about that, when things happen, you look at it. We talk about all the angst in the media and stuff like that. But when we look back, for me, it's I've been in the business now. This will be my 50th year. And when you look back and things like this come back to you like they were yesterday, you say to yourself, the good is always worth going through the bad to remember the good and the things like that. So we're pretty lucky.
I still think it's the best profession I could possibly be in.
Yeah.
I'm paid to do what I enjoy doing. It's a wonderful thing.
That's exactly right. But both you and I obviously aren't going to the press room at White House. What's going on? By pulling credentials from people because you don't like questions they ask is just simply absolutely amazing.
Well, yeah, that's one posting I've never had, and I certainly wouldn't like it in this White House. To be a member of the White House press corps at the moment, I think would be akin to a form of torture.
That is certainly. Well, speaking of form of torture, we've got our own torture with elections in America. But let me ask you a question about the European elections. What like that is also a big story that's not really being covered that much here in American media.
Sure, yeah, and it's revealing an awful lot about Europe's form of, I guess, we have to just accept the generalizing label now, populism. The far right in Europe is getting organized on an international basis. One of the things about nationalists, of course, is that they historically don't necessarily collaborate very well with other nationalists. But it seems that in the shadow of the European election, the Euro elections themselves coming along in a few weeks, we're getting national elections that show the flexing of muscles by nationalists, and it's a troubling omen for the European community and for the continent in general. You're seeing it outside of the realms of the old common market, the European Union itself, but it's certainly a continent-wide trend.
Well, you say the populist vote, and comparing Europe to the United States, you can't simply because the way the elections really are so different. But it's one of the things that sits in my back pocket all the time with Bernie Sanders, who is really the populist candidate that's on the Democratic ballot right now. Everybody else is either liberal or progressive liberal or mainstream Democrat. But really,
it seems that in general, journalistic use, populist is now regarded as a label, it's only applicable to the right. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, there are populists with political views that we could label.
Well, look at Jeremy. Jeremy Corbyn.
And why not?
Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn is a populist, really, basically.
Well, sure.
Even though he's not.
I mean, he's not that popular.
No, but he's that's so funny.
Yeah, popular populist.
That's exactly
Vox
so funny.
populi.
Yeah.
What absolutely. I'm waiting for someone, whenever I hear these labels, they're going back to America for a second, but then really want to go back there because it's such a parallel. For one thing, it's much shorter, but, you've got masses of people representing so many different parties, and it's just, it's a scrum. But what I want to say first about media labels is my favorite, socialism.
Oh, yes.
I'm waiting
to this country 29 years ago, and when asked of my own political beliefs, which of course I wouldn't espouse in my journalism, I still hew to that old adage that I'm apolitical when I write. But in my private life, I was asked what my politics were, and I said I'm a socialist, and I was surprised at the aghast reaction I had. I didn't realize it was a dirty word in America.
So I'm waiting for some professional to just say, right, socialists like Medicare. Because to me, that would just stop the...
Socialists like Social Security.
Exactly. But I'm waiting for just somebody to sit down. I'm long past the days of screaming at the TV. I don't care anymore. But I'm waiting for somebody who is paid vast amounts of dollars by these huge corporations that collect vast amount of dollars from regular people who watch their content. And for somebody to just say, yeah, socialists like Social Security, socialists like Medicare. So what are we talking about? I mean, I long for that, and I do not understand why and how regular people can constantly consume what is so clearly ginned up, froth, without their brains going, yo.
Mm-hmm.
I can't. I'm just it is beyond me. And you
Well,
watch you.
I don't have an easy explanation for it either, except that the whole idea of media literacy and indeed political literacy has come to such a low ebb in America that people are using labels all the time that they don't actually know the meaning of, and that's correctable only by improving our education.
It's funny that you say that, because Marshall said something the other day, which was along the lines of just go to school, learn stuff, read history, and then then engage and figure out what's going on. I saw somebody.
What a radical idea!
I know, what a concept, but the fact is, and this is what's troubling. There's so many things that are troubling, but that is actually happening. That's what people are really doing. It's just that it's not covered, because that would just be too tedious. I saw somebody on the DCCC's. I saw somebody on MSNBC the other day, which I found absolutely. It was riveting. I think it might have been Jonathan. I'm not positive. It was somebody that you absolutely. It was either John Meacham, Heilman, or Lemire, and it's someone that you always attribute with saying, whatever it is, it's negative and terrible. Except Meacham's always pretty balanced, but he does it from a more historical context. Whoever it was said, by the way, there's tremendous support for what's happening with China. Schumer's giving him all the running room in the world. I think it was an accident that it came out that way. But it was, oh my gosh, what is being portrayed and what they're actually doing. Because the whole thing is always designed as this maniac is all by himself. This maniac is running the country. And it's, you forget.
Well, he's the chief engineer.
No question. I'm not saying that. But every so often it accidentally slips out that there are these other people who are in agreement with X, Y, or Z, which is just never, it makes terrible TV, so you don't do it. But if you're accidentally by your device at the time that something like that comes out and you're not so distracted by everything else, you might hear something like that and go, oh, aha, that's why there aren't pitchforks right now on this particular issue.
I once shared a platform for discussion with John Meacham here in New York, and it was one of the most trenchant exchanges I've ever had. We engaged very, very fully, and right down to, I can't remember the actual details of it now, but I remember reflecting on it afterwards, that we really were getting down to some extraordinarily concrete and granular kinds of even down to definitions. What do you actually mean by that? It's such an interesting time when you can, it can be very interesting and challenging when someone really takes you seriously and really questions you in the interests of finding out what exactly you mean. And vice versa. I was able to do the same with him. It was good.
And what's really cool about that, and this is, again, this gets covered, it needs to stop, is for people to actually think that they should control or prohibit the expression of other people's views, like they can't cope, is, sorry, did you hear the way I said that? It was very LA, like they can't cope, is wrong. It's inappropriate. It's wrong. The only way to make one's beady little mind grow and open and expand is to endeavor to embrace other concepts. You're not. It's not agree, disagree. This isn't true, false. This is just listen. And the fact that is actually actively discouraged is frustrating.
Right. It's important to hold on to that principle, especially when people are trying to, at all times, but one of the ways in which, of course, that's being challenged is when people are nervous about hate speech. And you can see why that's troubling and why people would start to veer towards the banning or the exclusion of people, but at the same time, the broader principle should remain intact and always predominate that this is a country of free speech.
Here's where the problem.
And we must remain that way.
Here's where the problem occurs in America. People want free speech, okay, but when they get with the violent times we live in, and this is before Donald Trump. This is what's developed over the past 15 years with people's attitudes that I'm right, and it's either I'm right or it's you're wrong. It's never in between.
The social media has definitely amplified that.
So what happens is all of a sudden free speech and hate speech, which to me, if somebody spews something I don't like, I can speak up against it, I can ignore it, I can do what I want with it, but they've got the right to speak. But all of a sudden, hate actions have now come into play, and people jump the gun before something happens, and they actually create the environment for a physical confrontation. If you let somebody who's got very, very, very extreme and hateful views give their views in the forum they want to give it, and then either protest it afterwards or debunk it afterwards. But nowadays, provocation is the key, and it comes on both sides. And you want to provoke the other person into an action that is embarrassing. And
hopefully then film it.
And legislation in this area is notoriously difficult to come up with and enforce in an even-handed way. Britain, my old home country, found this with a whole new tranche of legislation which came up alongside what was called at the time the Race Relations Act. And it's in the area of race, I think, where these sensitivities come out most poignantly and pointedly. There had to be a whole new slew of crimes because of crimes being committed, but there had to be a new category of crime in the legislation that was enacted around race relations, and mostly it was, of course, about incitement. If the language used was such that it would incite violence, then, of course, that speech then became a crime. And then, so, of course, you see yourself moving dangerously close to banning certain kinds of speech. I'm very grateful for the fact that you can be prosecuted for inciting violence in a biased, racist way. But you can see that in law, it's starting to edge towards a gray area, and we've seen in legislation that has followed some forms of prohibition, which are very hard to frame properly, and are very hard to police in a way that is satisfying to the body politic overall.
Yeah, and again, when even though this is a theme, I'm afraid, when you give the echo chamber amplification, individual democratic quote power of everybody has their own device, and therefore everyone has their own.
We all become publishers on a large scale. Yeah, it's the old thing. You're not allowed to shout fire in a crowded theater. Well, we all have crowded theaters to shout at now,
and are having a field day shouting fire, which just again is baffling.
And what's interesting when I sit here and think about this, just people think about, and like I say, once again, I preface things by saying, folks, I'm no big supporter of Donald Trump. I'm anti-Trump every step of the way. But when people point their fingers at the people in the red caps at Trump rallies who are overboard and go overboard for a reason, they seem to forget that the liberal college student in college campuses prevent more people from speaking than you'd ever want to think. And it's just plain wrong. It's not only Trump supporters, and it's not only people like Donald Trump, but just take a look at the campuses and all the reactions when either Republican groups or other groups bring in speakers. What happens before that?
Oh, sure. There is intolerance across the board. I mean, I think that's very, very clear as you look at this very, very agitated country now. And in many ways, there are parallels constantly being made between ourselves being Americans now, because I'm an American now, and my old home continent years ago. So some people think it's extreme to talk about America having anything in common with the Weimar Republic in Germany in the interwar years. But I can see the form of intolerance that you're talking about. And it's not just left-wing intolerance. It's not just right-wing intolerance. It's intolerance across the board. Perhaps not in the center, because centrists generally tend to be more tolerant. But it does have very troubling cognates with what we saw in pre-Second World War Germany.
Just look at our political parties and where do political parties spend 25% of the money they raise? I'm talking about the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee. Where do they spend 25% of their money that they raise? Anybody know? Yeah. Opposition research, but it's not. It's not just. But it's not just opposition research. It's as dirty as operation research as you can possibly get. It's
pathetic. But I have to tell you, I'm signed up for everybody, and I'm going to turn this into about us. Marshall and I get up every day and try to run this radio station on less than a shoestring. It's ridiculous. Anyone who knows me knows this lament. Every day, I get 5-6 emails from various Democrats, the Connecticut Democrats, DNC. I'm totally confused. Up to and including somebody, we can flip this seat, North Carolina, whatever. Like, why is this okay? If you are actually sitting on the internet donating to that, certainly there is something where you live. I mean, obviously, if you're from North Carolina or in that district, but go for it. But what?
Well, it's called strategic thinking. For me, that's an entirely inappropriate label. I mean, it's tactical thinking, not strategic thinking.
Strategic. It's fundraising.
But yes, I mean to target things in the way that they do, and indeed to back it all with that incredibly well-funded opposition research too is a sad indicator of where our politics have gotten us.
And that's all brought on, by the way. That's all brought on by the Republican and Democratic National Committees. If they want to do that, if they want to spend money across the country, fine, go be it. Spend money across the country. If you want to donate to the Democratic National Committee, fine, go on. I don't, and I will not. I donate to the individual candidates of my choice, not to a committee that then takes my money and does with it what they want to do.
Targeting places far from you and all to do with their game plan. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's understandable. But on the other hand, you can see why it's developed that way, can't you? I mean, and indeed, the geographic patchwork of the United States when it comes to congressional elections is an open invitation to to all sorts of finagling. Gerrymandering has its base, its original roots in that kind of patchwork effect across the nation, and I think we're going to be living with it for a long time until
we'll be deading with
real electoral reform.
As I said, we'll be deading with it, and we're out of. In other words, you'll be gone, I'll be gone, Marshall will be gone, and other people will have to be living with it.
I fear so.
Well, on that happy note.
We were talking about memories right at the beginning of this talk.
Hopefully you'll live long enough for next week. Thank you very much, David Tereshchuk, The Media Beat.
I hope so. Thank you.